There's something nobody tells you about waking up. They don't mention that the moment you stop playing the game, everyone else becomes obsessed with making you play again. They don't warn you that your peace will be perceived as a threat, that your silence will be mistaken for judgment, that your freedom will look like madness to those still locked in their cages. And the strangest part is that you don't even feel like you're doing anything dramatic. You're not standing on a mountaintop announcing enlightenment. You're not waving around ancient scriptures or correcting people's spiritual grammar. You're simply breathing differently, walking differently, seeing differently, as if the world, which used to feel like a maze full of enemies and deadlines and expectations, suddenly became a playground where everything is strangely lighter than you remembered. But here's the cosmic joke. The moment you stop pretending, everyone else feels the absence of your performance. It's as if you stepped out of a play mid-scene and the other actors, still gripping their scripted lines, don't know where to place their hands anymore. They built an entire universe out of reactions. Who's right? Who's wrong? Who's offended? Who's winning? A universe where drama is oxygen and certainty is currency. When you refuse to buy in, they don't see your peace. They see an interruption. It doesn't occur to them that you've simply stopped fighting imaginary battles. To them, your stillness is suspicious. Your ease is provocative. Your lack of urgency feels like a personal insult. Because they're still living in what Alanwatts once called the old trick of the ego, the desperate attempt to hold reality still, to control the uncontrollable, to pretend the game is life and not just a game. When you stop taking the drama seriously, it feels like you're questioning the very foundation they stand on. You walk into a room and, without saying a word, something subtle shifts. Not because you're special, but because you're no longer carrying the heavy suitcase of identity. The suitcase they're still dragging around as if it contains gold, when really it's just filled with stories who they think they are, who they think you are, and who everyone is supposed to be. Awakening doesn't give you a halo, it gives you clarity. And clarity, to those still squinting through the fog, looks like arrogance. They think you're judging them when you're simply not participating. They think you're distant when you're simply not clinging. They think you've changed, when in truth, you've only stopped pretending to be the version of yourself they built inside their minds. To them, the game is real. You stepping out of it is the ultimate betrayal. And yet there's nothing to defend, nothing to prove. You didn't win the game, you simply stopped playing. And that far more than any sermon, any philosophy, any spiritual declaration irritates the ego more than anything else. Because when someone stops pretending, everyone else has to feel the weight of their own costume. And that's where the real story begins. There's a moment in every awakening, quiet, unannounced, almost accidental, when you realize you've become something unusual in the eyes of others. You become a mirror. Not a mystical one with glowing edges and ancient symbols engraved on its frame. Just a simple, clean mirror. The kind that shows people exactly what's already there, without adding a single judgment. And yet that is precisely what makes it so unsettling. Because most people do not actually want to see themselves. They want to see the mask they've grown comfortable wearing. The persona they've edited like a highlight reel. The story they've rehearsed for years about why they worry, why they hurry, why they lash out, why they can't change. The story that keeps the ego feeling solid, justified, necessary. When they look at you now, calm, unbothered, uninterested in the old drama, they don't see your freedom. They see the cracks in their own story. Your stillness makes their noise obvious. Your lack of reaction exposes their addiction to conflict. Your presence reveals the absence in their own. And it's never intentional. That's the part they'll never believe. You're not trying to teach them anything. You're not trying to awaken them. You're just existing without the constant mental static they've mistaken for a personality. But the ego is a fragile creature. It can't stand raw reflection. It can't bear the possibility that the suffering it clings to might be optional, or worse, self-created. So it does what frightened egos have always done. It projects. Suddenly, you're too quiet, too intense, too detached, too calm, too something. They will assign you any label that helps them avoid the real truth. In your presence, they can't hide from themselves. You're like a room with the lights unexpectedly switched on. The shadows jump. The dust becomes visible. The clutter can no longer pretend to be order. Nothing changed except illumination. Alanwatts often described life as a dance, a playful movement of energy pretending to be separate. But here's the twist. The ego dances only if everyone else keeps moving in predictable steps. The moment you stop, the moment you stand still, the choreography collapses. Others stumble not because you did anything wrong, but because you revealed that the dance was never mandatory. They'll talk more around you, as if words can fill the silence you're no longer afraid of. They'll ask if something's wrong, as if peace is a diagnosis. They'll attempt to reignite old arguments, as if conflict is the only language they trust. Not to hurt you, though it might feel that way. They're trying to drown out the echo of their own unease. And the awakened person watches all this with a soft understanding, because you remember. You remember when stillness felt like danger, when silence felt like exposure, when you mistook noise for aliveness. You know their discomfort is not an attack, it's a symptom. So you remain the mirror, clear, unforced, undistorted, not because you want them to see themselves, but because you no longer need to look away. At a certain point, the ego of others realizes that your calm isn't a phase. It's not a mood. It's not you being off. It's something deeper, something inconveniently stable. And that's when the three ancient reflexes appear, as reliably as tide and moon: the pull, the test, and the story. The pull comes first. It always does. It begins innocently. A sigh, a disappointed look, why don't you react the way you used to? They want the old you, the predictable you, the one who played the game without questioning the rules. They want the version of you who explained every feeling, apologized for every boundary, justified every choice as if your life were a group project. When you stop doing that, it's like taking away their compass. They don't know how to navigate someone who isn't seeking permission. And when the pull fails, when you don't step back into character, the test begins. The test is subtle at first, a poke at an old wound, a comment crafted to sting, a memory resurrected purely to see if your piece is real or just well performed. The ego isn't malicious, it's terrified. It needs conflict the way a fire needs oxygen. Without a little drama, a little friction, a little story about who's right and who's wrong, it fears it will disappear. So they provoke you. They want to see you flinch, to see you defend, to see you react. Because if they can make you slip, if they can drag you back into the argument, the gossip, the emotional tug of war, they can sigh with relief and say, "Ah, there you are. You're just like us." Your reaction saves their worldview. It reassures them that awakening is a myth, that freedom is impossible, that no one ever truly changes. Your peace becomes the enemy because it threatens the very foundation of their identity. But then something even stranger happens. The tests fail. And when the tests fail, the stories begin. The ego cannot leave an unexplained phenomenon alone. If you do not provide a self-narrative, the ego will build one for you. It begins innocently enough. You've changed. Then it deepens. You're distant. Then it sharpens. You think you're better than us. And when that story doesn't land, the ego gets creative. Suddenly you're broken, or lost, or brainwashed, or secretly falling apart. The specifics of the story don't matter. What matters is that it turns your freedom into a problem to solve rather than a possibility to consider. Because if your peace is normal, then their chaos becomes optional, and that is the most threatening idea of all. And here's the beautiful cosmic joke about all of this. None of these reactions are really about you. They never were. The pull is fear of change. The test is fear of illusion. The story is fear of freedom. You simply happen to be the mirror that reflects all three. And the awakened person sees it, not with superiority, but with softness. Because you know the truth. People don't attack your peace because they hate it. They attack it because some deep part of them knows it's possible, and that possibility terrifies the ego more than anything else in the universe. There's a strange thing that happens when you awaken. Strangers are often more comfortable with the new you than the people who raised you, loved you, or shared years of memories with you. You would think family and old friends would be the first to celebrate your peace, the first to cheer for your freedom, the first to say, "I'm proud of you." But no awakening has its own sense of irony. The people closest to you are often the ones most shaken, because they aren't relating to you, they're relating to the version of you that lived inside their minds. A character, a role, a familiar pattern in their personal play. When you wake up, you don't just step out of the story, you vanish from the script entirely. And, to them, that feels like losing gravity. They say things like, "You've changed." But what they really mean is, you stop being predictable. They say, "You're distant." But what they mean is, you're no longer acting in the drama I depend on. They say, "I miss the old you." But what they mean is, "I miss the version of you I could understand." And it's not because they're bad or unenlightened. It's because your awakening quietly questions something terrifying. If you can change, then everything can. If you can step out of old patterns, then those patterns were never destiny. If you can free yourself from the identity they clung to, then maybe identity itself is softer, looser, more illusory than they believed. The ground under their feet begins to wobble. Alanwatts often said the ego loves certainty, even miserable certainty. There's a strange comfort in repeating the same arguments, the same emotional cycles, the same family roles, because they feel known. Awakening breaks that spell. You stop biting the bait. You stop rising to the hook. You stop apologizing for simply existing. And the moment you stop playing the part, the rest of the cast doesn't know whether to continue the scene or walk off stage. So they try to pull you back. They summon old grievances like ghosts. They recreate old conflicts, hoping the past will resurrect your old reactions. They bring up who you used to be, as if memories could drag you back into the dream. But you've seen through the illusion, and once the curtain has dropped, you can't pretend the stage is real again. You can smile, you can be present, you can love them deeply, but you can't shrink yourself back into a character your soul outgrew. This is the delicate dance of awakening, to remain loving without collapsing into old patterns, to remain present without surrendering your clarity, to remain open without handing over your freedom. You become both near and far at the same time, close enough to touch, yet rooted in a depth they cannot reach unless they walk there themselves. And that distance, that unmoving center inside you, irritates their egos more than anything else. It proves that peace is possible, that drama is optional, that the story was never the truth. Yet beneath their irritation is something softer, something unspoken, a quiet longing. They see your freedom, and some hidden part of them whispers, "I want that too, but I don't know how." You don't need to teach them. You don't need to convince them. Your presence is already the teaching. You simply continue to live from that quiet depth and let them discover in their own time that nothing about your awakening took anything from them, except the illusion that you were ever anything less than free. There comes a moment in every genuine awakening when you stop wondering why people are irritated by you. You stop trying to decode their reactions.
Stop trying to fix their discomfort.
Stop trying to earn their approval for a freedom they can't yet recognize. Instead, something simpler, quieter, more spacious dawns on you. It was never about you. It was always the ego encountering its own reflection and mistaking the mirror for the threat. And this realization brings a kind of cosmic humor, a softness, a forgiveness that asks for nothing in return. Because you understand now, truly understand, that awakening doesn't make you superior or separate. It simply makes you transparent. The ego cannot grab you, cannot hook you, cannot use you to reinforce its favorite stories. You slip through its fingers like water because you're not fighting anymore. You're not resisting the game, but you're not hypnotized by it either. You participate in life the way a dancer moves through music, not to reach a destination, not to prove anything, but because the movement itself is the joy. And this is perhaps the most irritating thing of all to the sleeping ego. Your freedom is so quiet, so ordinary, so unearned looking. It exposes the lie that awakening is an accomplishment. It reveals that nothing was missing, that consciousness was always whole, always here, always playing. People sense this in you long before they can describe it. They feel your lightness, your refusal to cling, your unavailability for drama, and some part of them, some ancient, buried, wordless part, recognizes it. It frightens the ego, yes, but it awakens the soul. And that is why your presence triggers. Not because it wounds, but because it reminds. It reminds people of what they are beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the machinery of the mind. You become a quiet doorway, not a preacher, not a guru, just a doorway. Some will walk through, most will not, and both choices are perfect. The gift of awakening is not that people understand you, it's that you no longer require them to. You no longer bargain your peace for their comfort. You no longer shrink to fit their expectations. You no longer apologize for the parts of you that finally learned how to breathe. And here is the final paradox, the one the ego finds hardest to swallow. The less you try to awaken anyone, the more your presence becomes a teaching. Not because you're trying to guide them, but because your existence quietly says, look, it's possible. So let them project, let them test, let them misunderstand, let them feel whatever they feel. You remain what you are. Awareness playing as a human for a little while. A wave remembering it is the ocean. A dancer remembering the dance was never serious. A mirror that doesn't judge what it reflects. And to the viewer listening right now, yes, you, there's something important here. If you've been triggering others lately, if your peace has been unsettling to people who once felt comfortable around you, don't assume you're doing something wrong. It may be that you've simply stopped pretending, that you've stepped out of the old story, that your very existence has become a reminder, and reminders naturally disturb the dreamer. But disturbances are how people wake up, so be the reminder, gently, quietly, authentically. Not by effort, just by being what you already are. If this resonated with you, share your thoughts below. Tell me about the reactions you've felt, the shifts you've noticed, the ways your presence has changed the room. Your story might be the reminder someone else needs.